All right, welcome back. It's, as I said, it's great to see all of your faces. Great to be back together to continue talking about what is a really important and I think spiritually pertinent topic. We're talking today about the question of, does God really hear our prayers, and does it matter? Can I just get a show of hands who was here last week? I think almost everyone was here last week. Okay, great. A couple that were not. That's fine. This will be a continuation of what we talked about last week, but there's no test afterwards, so you certainly don't have to have the prerequisite beforehand. I'm going to share my screen, and we'll say the blessing for study together, and then we'll launch into this conversation. If you'd like, you can unmute and say the blessing with me. Let me just get to the right screen here. All right, let's stay together. Baruch atah Adonai Blessed is the one whose commandments make our lives holy, and who commands us to engage in, to immerse in words of Torah. So as we re-enter into this topic about prayer, let me do just a little bit of backtrack, a little bit of reminder of what it is that we talked about last week. We started off last week talking about a disconnect. What is a disconnect for many of us between our own beliefs about God, about the divine, and what we believe Judaism teaches about the divine. And we displayed this disconnect by putting words into the chat, which in some cases were the same in terms of what we believe and what we think Judaism teaches. And in some cases were not at all the same. What we believe, we tend to find God, if I remember correctly from last week, in relationships, in the natural world, in experiences. We tend to experience God as something that we participate in, that we tap into, that we experience around us, as opposed to the Jewish traditional language of God as being, as what we might call a personal God. And that disconnect is on display in the blessings, the language of prayer that we use in our Siddur. And if you remember, we did a close reading last week of these 6 words: Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, who is the ruler of the universe. And we talked about how these words, on the one hand, speak to us in terms of the connection with tradition, the connection with other Jews who are reciting the same words, the notion of finding ourselves in the rituals that our people have been performing over the course of centuries and generations. But on the other hand, we found that these words don't always speak to our own theology, especially when they frame God as someone who hears our prayers, someone out there who is a person, a being, who brings forth bread from the earth, who is referred to in masculine language. We talked about atah as being the word you, masculine. Adonai as literally meaning Lord, and melech haolam as literally meaning king of the world, even though we sometimes say ruler of the universe. And so we gave ourselves permission last week to live in both of those spaces, to experience the disconnect, both between connection with the words and also disconnection from the words, and the desire to find additional modes of talking about God and of prayer that are not necessarily about asking God for things. And we fortunately found this story from the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidic Judaism, who teaches about a boy who is a shepherd, if you remember the story, who enters the synagogue on Yom Kippur and starts to play his flute or his whistle. And while you might think that that was wrong, you might think that it was interrupting the prayers, breaking the rules, stopping God from hearing the prayers and responding to what we need, the Baal Shem Tov suggests, and I can just read the last part of this. He says, until now, I could feel our prayers being blocked as they tried to reach the heavenly gates. This young shepherd's whistling was so pure that it brought all of our prayers straight up to God. So the Baal Shem Tov in Hasidic Judaism suggests that part of the meaning of prayer is not only about asking God to do things for us or asking God to hear us, but also in the experience of our being lifted, in the experience of what it is that prayer does for us or engages in us, or the switch that prayer flips in us. So with all of that as background, I wanted to have a short discussion about our own prayer experiences. And I wanted to invite you to describe a meaningful prayer experience that you've had. Not too long. I don't want to spend all 50 minutes that we have talking about this, but I do want to give us an opportunity to share with one another what was a meaningful prayer experience that you've had. And then maybe we can parse from that what it is that makes prayer meaningful. So if you can, if you're interested, you can either put something into the chat or you can raise your hand electronically. And I see Susan, and I believe, Susan, you have an experience to share, right?
Yes, I do. An elderly gentleman, and I use elderly because he is 94 years old, has been unwell, and from my synagogue, who I've known for quite some time, and whose wife I also know very well. He was sick, and he finally has ended up in hospice. And I went to sit with her on Saturday because the family had sort of was coming and going, and we were just sort of sitting there. And as we were sitting there, the chaplain on duty that day came in, and it happened to be someone that I have known for a very long time when I used to work with Interfaith Community Services. So we're just chatting, and then the son and the daughter-in-law came, and Karen, the chaplain, made ready to move, and they said, "Well, since you're leaving, maybe if you know any Jewish prayers, maybe you could say one." And she said, "Well, I'm not really Jewish." And I said, "Well, I know some Jewish prayers." And we're all masked, and gowns and everything. And they said, "Well, okay, go right ahead." So I didn't know what to say. And I said, "Shema Yisrael," and started the Vahapta and left my place several times. And finally, I just said, "Eloheinu ve'Elohei Avotenu." And I started out by saying, "Please bring peace." And I stopped and I said, "May there be peace. May this room be filled with light. May there be relief from suffering." I really do not know what, but that's how I pray. And I did. And they were grateful. And I felt something, because when I do these extemporaneous things, I never remember what I say. It's just something that I feel that comes out.
Beautiful. Thanks, Susan, for sharing that really beautiful experience. It just a hint in there about the ways that prayer is about connection with others, which is one of the modes that we talked about. I'll just read what Lee put into the chat, which is praying at the Western Wall in Jerusalem made me feel connected to Jews throughout history and to the land of Israel. Thanks, Lee. Amy, and then Daniel.
A number of years ago, I went to a grocery store with my mother, and she said something about a very hard experience that I had, and had an anxiety attack, trying to disappear, crying insanely hard. Come on, God, help me disappear. And all of a sudden, some random woman started making moves toward me. She asked me to explain and everything. It's like, I'm simply having something hard because my mom decided to remind me of a really traumatic 5 years of my life. She's like, "So, anything can do to help you?" Like, "I'm not sure you can. I'm simply desperate to be invisible and audible." And yep, she simply decided to show some initiative and started praying, asking God to help my internal balance, restabilize, ask God to make sure I never had to stress about anything like that ever again. She then gave me a hug and vanished. I mean, I had a certain kind of wariness. I mean, it's pathetic. They always think like this. Yeah, right. If people ask anything about praying, it is pretty automatic due to religious heterosexism that assume they are Christian. And then they start getting paranoid. Holy shit, do they want to pray that God's gonna save me or something?
Yeah, thank you, Amy, for sharing that. And again, the idea of connection coming in here, right? A connection, the ways that we can find comfort or connection in others during difficult moments. Just back to the chat, I see Corinne put a drum circle with close friends and others. And I think music and people and even the rhythm can be such a connector. Paula put Shabbat dinners. And I think, there we have family, maybe music. I don't know what your Shabbat dinners look like, but the ways that we connect with each other. I see two more hands. So Daniel and Sarah, if you want to share your moments as well, and I'll just ask you to keep them a little bit brief, please.
I'm trying as I can. I also had this was my first Jewish praying experience also in the Western Wall, which also made me encourage myself to also convert to Judaism. And this was until then my most the most memorable moments in my life, when I felt like not only the connection to the wall, but also to the other Jews praying while in the Pesach holidays. I remembered also the experience as a foreigner, having holidays in Israel to see how they live their religion and so on. This was all so connecting to me, that really made me came in touch to something divine. And whenever I am also praying today or connecting with friends, also to the earth, or meditating, or in some similar activities like this, it always reminds me of the feeling that I had came in touch with the wall, with praying for the first time, as someone who just was pretending to think, okay, I'm just imagining that there's some kind of God, and just trying for the sake of believing in him, and just praying there. And even though it was so not what someone is supposed to pray or something to say, all these activities right now in my all-day life remind me of that, and made me remember where I get to believe in God and choose the way as a Jew in my life. And so
Amazing. Thank you, Daniel.
That was short enough.
That was great. Yeah, thank you. Sarah,
amazing.
Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm kind of new to Judaism. I think I kind of started when 7 Minutes Forest started. But it's been nice for me learning about the brachas. I've always been the type of person to oh, look at the rainbow, look at the cows, and there's always someone inevitably says why are you pointing this out to me? So there are cows, so there's a rainbow. But learning that there's a bracha for so many of these things, and that, just taking a moment to recognize and be grateful for the beauties in the world. It's a really beautiful, tradition. It's nice to be able to share it with my kid.
Yes, I love that. Thank you, Sarah. And I like to think of saying blessings over foods and drinks, and over, rainbows and, beautiful natural scenes. I think of it as a Jewish mindfulness exercise, right? It encourages us to stop and be present in the moment. I'm hearing a lot of different themes here. a lot of which have to do with connection, with awe, with mindfulness and presence, the notion of connecting with something larger than ourselves. So as I share my screen again, we're going to take a look at a text. This was not part of the original talk when I put together the what we were going to do here. And then as I was preparing for the Midrash study group that I teach tomorrow, I found this text. So those of you that are in the Midrash study group, you'll see this again tomorrow, but that's okay because you'll see other things as well. This is about sacrifice. And the Torah portion that we're reading right now is all about priestly sacrificial things. It's so hard to relate to. It's about like, how did they perform the sacrifices and where they pour the blood, and they're cutting up the animals and and they're turning it into smoke on the altar. And this is what in the Talmud, what Rabbi Shimon ben Azai says. He points out that of the ox, I'm up here, hopefully you can see my cursor up there. About the ox, which is large, it is said, an offering made by fire made of sweet savor. Of the bird, which is small, it is said, an offering made by fire of sweet savor. And of the meal offering, it says, of a sweet savor. In other words, all these different kinds of meals, of sacrifices, offerings, it says the same thing. It describes it in the exact same way in terms of how God accepts it. Now, you might have thought that God would have, be more satisfied from a bull than from a pile of grain, right? I mean, when we have a big steak, I'm a vegetarian, but back when I used to eat meat, when you eat a big steak versus like a bowl of Cheerios, you don't feel the same way afterwards necessarily. You feel, differently full, differently satisfied. But the Torah says the exact same thing about all these kinds of offerings with regard to how God accepts them. And what does this teach us? I'm right here now. To teach us that it is the same whether a person offers much or little, so long as one directs one's heart to heaven. So the message here is that the offering that you're offering has, in fact, more to do with the direction of your heart, with your heart being directed heavenward, which I think is another way of describing what we were talking about. The sense of awe that you experience when you notice a rainbow and bless it. The sense of connectedness when you maybe stand at the Western Wall or in the midst of a drum circle or surrounded by people that you love. And the Midrash goes on to say, lest you say God needs the offering for food. Scripture states, Torah says, if I, God, were hungry, I wouldn't speak to you about it. I did not bid you to offer sacrifices that you might be able to say, I will do God's will so that God will do my will. You sacrifice not for my sake, but for your own sake. As it is said, you shall sacrifice it for your sake. And that's in next week's Torah portion. So the message here seems to be something like that the offerings we make, the prayers we recite, the blessings we say, the moments of prayerfulness that we enter into, they are for our sake. God doesn't need our prayers. We need our prayers, which raises the question of what is it that our prayers do for us? What is it that our prayers activate within us? And I think we're starting to hint at that with all the stories that you all are raising about connection, about awe, about reflection. Holly just put into the chat, prayer is reflexive. We mentioned that last week, that the Hebrew word for prayer, lehit palel, actually means to debate yourself. It's a reflexive word. It's something you're doing to yourself rather than something you're doing to God. So let's start, as we did last week, from a Hasidic thinker, and then we'll move into some more modern thinking as well. This is Rabbi Shmuel Berezovsky. Rabbi Shmuel Berezovsky is still living. Actually, he lives in Jerusalem, and he is the leader of what's called the Slonim Hasidim. Slonim was a town in Eastern Europe, as many great stories begin in a small town in Eastern Europe. And the Slonim Hasidim, the Slonim dynasty, was all but wiped out during the Holocaust. You can imagine there are not Jews in Slonim anymore. But the Slonim Hasidim, some of them at least, made their way to America and to Jerusalem. And the Slonim Yeshiva is now located in Jerusalem. Rabbi Shmuel Berezovsky's father was the Slonim Rebbe before him, and his father before him was the Slonim Rebbe, and so on and so on and so forth. Now, I know this text because I've been studying it with my chavruta on Thursday mornings, and I found it particularly meaningful. Here's what the Slonim Rebbe says about prayer, and I want to ask you your reactions to what he says. He says, this is the power that exists in prayer. By means of it, a person is lifted up to the heights of the world, over and above the limitations of a physical point of view, and begins to see everything from the heights. From there, once he can begin to see properly, I think that's a typo. From there, one can begin to see properly the greatness of the Creator, and this brings him to love, to a great longing, and to reverence and fear or awe, and humility and lowness. This is a sign that a person's prayer was performed properly. When one feels a sense of surrender and humility afterward, the prayer was appropriate. So the Slonim Rebbe says, on the one hand, your prayers lift you up to the heights of the world. And on the other hand, he says that our prayers make us feel humility. They give us a sense of being humble. And so I want to ask you to help me parse this, help me interpret this. What is he saying about prayer here? Do you agree? Do you disagree? And do the two parts of what he said, that prayer lifts you up to the heights of the world and that prayer makes you feel humility, do those even go together? Anybody have thoughts on that? Amy, go ahead.
If you ask me, they can, since certain prayers, like saying a blessing, because you saw a rainbow or something, smooth. You're praying because you're acknowledging that you feel higher, that something holy has happened. Smooth. Doing 180, if you're praying due to something hard, decent to high probability, you're gonna feel like you are acknowledging something hard, and perhaps you have to have some kind of help or something. And on a personal level, I don't have it hard feeling surrender at all. Because when I hear surrender spoken, I'm thinking doing something to let everything go. And I don't have it very hard letting something go after I pray.
So prayer somehow helps you to be able to let things go. It gives you a different viewpoint. Is that what you're saying, Amy?
Definitely so.
Yeah, and I see in the chat, Paula said that the heights is something greater than yourself, right? Which in a sense leads to humility. It's interesting to think about how being lifted up to what he calls Romem Shel Olam, the heights of the world. To me, I hear that as being opened up in my viewpoint. Have you ever been stuck in something that you just can't make your way out of? You're angry about something, you're upset about something, you're frustrated by something, and you needed something that would shift your viewpoint, right? That would raise you up above the point, the place of stuckness that you're in. I think of what he's saying as being of like a God's eye view. I don't know if there is such a thing or not, but that notion that you can rise up above the thing in which you feel stuck, and to see other options around you. And sometimes prayer actually, I think, can do that for us. That is to say, we can be in a prayer experience and you suddenly feel a sense of connectedness, you feel a sense of awe, and you are literally able to see options and to understand things that you didn't understand before. From a psychological perspective, there's a lot of truth to this, actually. When we're feeling negative emotion like fear and anger, our ability to see options is actually narrowed. Whereas when we experience positive emotions like connection and awe, our ability to see options is widened. So there is something to this idea, I think, that you can sort of be lifted up to a higher eye view when you put yourself into situations where you feel connection and awe and maybe even humility. Let's just look at what some said in the chat, and then we'll go to the other hands that are up. I see Alyssa said, as humans, it's not always easy to ask for help. So prayers in itself gives a sense of humility, right? That gives a sense of being part of something larger, and that maybe it's okay to ask for help. And Lee says, like standing at the edge of the ocean and feeling restored, but also just a tiny speck in the universe, right? That you are, it's like, I saw some people put in the chat as well, that idea of having in one hand that I'm nothing but dust and ashes, and in the other hand, that the whole world was made only for me. So I see Daniel, and then I see Susan.
Yeah, my kind of experience in prayer differs in which kind of prayer that you get. For example, when I wake up in the morning or before I go to bed, try always to keep up the habit with the Shema Israel prayer, which is some kind of reminder of me that there's still something greater than me in life. There's still a greater like purpose. I'm not here to play a first person game or something. I'm one of like billions of people who all should need to watch like to Adonai, as the prayer says, some kind of, which gives me like the feeling of humbleness. Or for example, when I bless my food, for example, feel the feeling of thankfulness for the food that I have. Also that it's not guaranteed that I get this kind of food to my table. Some other people in the world don't have the fortune as I have, for example. And with that, I always get like to the core values of what Judaism teaches me, or what the prayer are saying. And I think for me, it's like the difference between the kind of prayer that I'm saying and for what purpose, but all goes into the same direction as the rabbi has said. And so I need to completely agree with that.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Yeah, I'm glad you put two very important words on the table here. One is gratitude, and the other is awe. And I think awe and gratitude are actually connected with each other, that when we feel a sense of awe, we tend toward gratitude. And when we feel gratitude, we actually tend toward humility. It's interesting how feeling big can help you feel small, and feeling small can actually help you feel big, which is why I think those two notes, I am dust and ashes and the whole world was created only for me, are actually so deeply related to each other. Because when we recognize how small we are, it actually can lead us to gratitude, which can lead us to generosity, which gives you a sense of your immense capacity to make a difference in the world, which is the opposite of being small. Susan, go ahead.
Well, I was looking at the bottom of this where I guess the source is Darchei Noam, and I looked up Darchei Noam because I remembered where it was, and it's in the Eitz Chaim prayer, which is one of the ones that really does resonate with me. And there's definitely, for me, in my meandering personal prayers, not necessarily the greatness of the creator, but the greatness of the universe and the energy of the universe. And definitely a moment of humility that I'm able to make this connection and say whatever it is that's in my heart and soul. And what I was thinking about was where it says the word humility, there's also the word I resonated with humanity, to feel the connection with humanity, that we're all somehow connected in an energetic way, whether that's prayer, whether that's breath, whether that's knowing people personally, whether that's seeing faces on the screen from week after week. That too is prayer to me.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Susan, which reminds me of something that we looked at last week together. I'll just go back a slide here, when we looked at this prayer from Marcia Falk, when she rewrote the Hamotzi, she replaced Melech HaOlam, ruler of the universe or king of the universe, with Ein HaChaim, source of life, right? And Ein HaChaim, when we talk about God as the source of life, that actually, what you're talking about there is our larger connection with each other, right? This thing that we are all part of. And so it seems to me, and I feel the same, when I talk about my own theology for a second, for me, praying is very much about connecting with something that we are all part of. And for me, that is God, right? I don't think of God as a separate being out there necessarily. I do think of God as something, some experience, a universe that we are all part of, which doesn't have to be how we all think about God, but I resonate with that idea as well. So, and I like all the cat comments in the chat. As I said, pets welcome. This is Rabbi Deborah Smith. Rabbi Deborah Smith is a renewal rabbi, and she wrote this kavanah, this blessing before eating. I don't think we looked at this last week, right? Did we? Okay, good. My question for you, as I'm going to read this, is this a prayer? Why or why not? Support your answer, like you had to do in high school debate. Rabbi Deborah Smith writes this kavanah before eating. Kavanah in Hebrew means intention. We talk about praying with kavanah, meaning that you prayed with intention. It's almost, I think of it as almost like mindfulness, pray with awareness or, presence. But a kavanah is a statement of intention, a statement of intentionality that you say before performing an action. So this is a kavanah before eating. And again, my question for you is this a prayer? She writes, source of all, thank you for your plentiful offerings, for the treasures of healthy sustenance I enjoy every day. Grant me wisdom to make healthy choices. Guide me to find the balance in my life. Help me nurture my body and spirit to serve you fully and in love. Amen. So, is it a prayer? Why or why not? Corinne says, yes, as all is Torah, all can be prayer. I like that, Corinne, you're referencing Pirkei Avot, where it says, hafoch ba v'hafoch ba dechule ba, turn it and turn it, because everything is in it. I see a couple of yeses. Someone says, I see it. I would say it is a prayer. She is doing this with intent. A couple of people asking, why wouldn't it be? Anybody want to argue this is not prayer? In previous classes I've taught, and the reason I bring this up is because sometimes people have said that it's not clear who she's necessarily talking to. When she says source of life, am I talking to someone that actually can do anything for me? Can God, if God is not a being, if God is not a personal God, can God even grant me the source of life, grant me the wisdom? Or are those things that I'm asking of myself? Am I somehow reminding myself to live with the wisdom that I know? Am I reminding myself to make healthy choices? That is to say, is it really up to God whether I make healthy choices? Or is it up to me to not eat those 4 butter tarts that are sitting on the counter, if you know what I mean, which is, by the way, exactly what I did on Saturday morning, right? So the question of what is prayer, I think, in some ways is about the question of who am I talking to? But I see a lot of comments in the chat, and I see David's hand. So David, go ahead, and then we'll turn to the chat.
It is.
Oh, David, it's very hard to hear you. Are you able to either get closer to your microphone or? Now we can't hear you at all. Okay, he'll put it into the chat. Sorry about that, David. So I see in the chat some saying definitely prayer, providing thankfulness and recognizing our abundance. Yes, we talked about gratitude and thankfulness. Prayer can be said to anyone and anything. If someone just reads it like a menu without spirit, is that what you mean, Daniel, that it wouldn't be prayer?
Yeah, then it wouldn't be prayer, because if you're just like reading it or like as a routine or something, then the purpose of the prayer gets lost. That was the point that I made.
Yeah, okay. And Corinne then adds to that, it's not a Jewish form of blessing. In other words, it doesn't say Baruch atah Adonai, right? It doesn't praise God for something God does for us. This is much more about us, but it is then in line with that passage we saw from the Talmud, which talks about how our offerings are for us, in the sense that God doesn't need our offerings. I'm just going to continue through the chat here. Karen says, what if life is our connection to others? And Vicky says, it's said with intention, right? It doesn't matter. It's said with intention and it's personal for us. Susan, go ahead.
I apologize for hogging the microphone, but last week I said Baruch atah Adonai, et cetera, was meaningless to me. And now I see it in a little bit of, meaningless and wrote as prayer. Now I see it in a little bit of a different light. I see it sort of as a preamble to all of these things that can follow from one's own soul. And I think that kavanah before eating is setting an intention, not necessarily praying, although source of all is a reminder of prayer. But I certainly see grant me wisdom, but again, I can't ask God or a God or whatever God is to grant me something. I would paraphrase this by saying, may I have the wisdom. And that would be the way I pray, and that is the way I pray. But I do see this as a prayer.
Well, and I'll say that I appreciate that liberal Judaism gives us the latitude to believe different things about God, to say different things about God. Some of us are very comfortable with the language of Baruch atah Adonai because we believe in a personal God. Some of us aren't so comfortable with the theology behind it, but we like the language behind it because it's what Jews have been saying for a very long time. And so we can say Baruch atah Adonai while thinking in different terms about God. Some of us can't, right? Some of us don't like the language of Baruch atah Adonai, which is why, like Marcia Falk, we can rewrite it to say, let us bless the source of life rather than blessed are you, ruler of the universe. And I'll just say that we can be all of those people at different times, right? What you think or feel about God today might be different than what you thought or felt about God a year ago or a week from now, or in a given moment. I think that our relationship with the divine changes depending on our circumstances and what we're experiencing in a given moment, which means that all these modes of prayer can be part of our lives, and that liberal Judaism gives us that kind of latitude. I'll just point out a couple more things in the chat. David saying, I believe that God is within us. So we are praying to have the guidance within ourselves and not eat the packages of hamantash or butter tarts, as I said earlier. A moral compass, if you will. So if you're tapping into something in yourself, am I praying to myself? Do I think I'm God? Or do I think that I have the capacity for, again, rising up to the heights of the world, rising up to the God's eye view and seeing the world through the most divine voice that's within myself. And I see that Corinne said that spark of God is within me and within others. Then they make me better. I will make me better, and also the world. And I like that Leonard Cohen quote as well: "The blaze of light in every world." So let's look at another couple of passages here about prayer. We talked about Debbie Friedman last week, so we won't belabor this passage, but this is the Mishaberach, which Debbie Friedman transformed, if you remember, from an asking God to heal us into an asking God to help us find the blessing the courage to make our lives a blessing. In other words, it's this notion of partnership, that how does God bring healing into the world? It may well be through us, right? How can years ago, I can't remember which rabbi said this, which very wise rabbi said this, but we were praying in Misha Berach. You know how it is in Misha Berach, people have these long lists of names that they'll rattle off, right? And we've all either been that person, or at times, had a lot of people that we were praying for. And the rabbi says afterwards, have you recently called the people whose names you just mentioned? And I remember looking around to others thinking, no, I've been saying the name, but that doesn't mean I've necessarily called them recently. And the rabbi said, some of the good of praying, of being prayed for, is about knowing that you were prayed for. So if you said somebody's name from Misha Berach today, I would challenge you this week to call them and check in on them. And that really stuck with me, because I think that, if prayer is about finding the courage to make our lives a blessing, then the Misha Berach is answered not only through God magically making our loved ones better, which would be nice, but rather through us reminding ourselves of our responsibility to make the world better and to be a blessing of healing in each other's lives. So I like what Debbie did with the Misha Berach, because I think it reminds us that the responsibility for healing is not only ours, but is not only God's, but also ours. Which leads me to Rabbi Ferdinand Isserman, who wrote as follows. And again, I want to get your reactions and hear what you think he's trying to teach. Prayer invites God's presence to suffuse our spirits, God's will to prevail in our lives. Prayer may not bring water to parched fields, nor mend a broken bridge, nor rebuild a ruined city. But prayer can water an arid soul, mend a broken heart, and rebuild a weakened will. What are your reactions? What do you think? Let's start with this. What is he trying to say? Anybody want to parse for us what Rabbi Isserman is teaching? By the way, this is often attributed to Abraham Joshua Heschel. It wasn't really Abraham Joshua Heschel, it was Ferdinand Isserman. Heschel is one of those people that I think just gets quotes saddled with him, because he said so many great things that we think he said all the great things. Sarah, go ahead.
Oh, we all know the hypocrisy of thoughts and prayers when nothing's actually being done, and how annoying that, how obnoxious and self-righteous that is.
Yeah, so in other words, what you have here then is prayer is not just about what you put out there, right? Prayer is somehow about the reminder to yourself to act. I think that's what that's what you're saying, Sarah.
I'm sorry, I got distracted. Yeah, that if you're just saying, I'm such a holy person, I'm praying, but you're not doing anything about it, it's then it's not helpful, and it just and it even kind of stymies people from doing stuff.
Mm-hmm. Right. I can see that, where if you feel that your responsibility is prayer rather than action. But if prayer, I like what Daniel said, prayer is spiritual fuel. Never heard that before, Daniel, but I'm going to steal it for future classes if it's okay with you. That our prayer actually somehow fuels us. They say that, how do you know if your prayer has been answered? The one who rises from prayer a better person, their prayer has been answered. In other words, the prayer is somehow supposed to fuel our ability to go out into the world and make the world a better place, which, if I can go back a slide, I think is what Debbie Friedman means when she says, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing. Lee, go ahead.
I believe all of that and try to act on that. But right now in the Jewish world, there are so many things that we can't influence or don't seem to be able to influence that are so destructive to us. And when we, pray for peace in Israel, for instance, where does that fit. When we can phone our friends and family in Israel and comfort them and do other things that are actions, but when a situation just seems so impossible, where does my prayer fit in there?
Yeah, well, let's put that on the table. And I see a couple other hands, which I imagine are about this. What role does prayer play in a situation that feels so intractable, right? There are things I can do. I can call friends. I can let others know I'm thinking about them, but I don't actually have it within my ability to forge a peace treaty between Israel and the Palestinians, right? So in a situation where we feel so helpless, what is the role of prayer? Can we talk about that for a few? Amy, is your comment about that? And Susan? Go ahead, Amy.
Strange. According to any understanding I have, half based off a quotation that I've seen in many a prayer book, and half based off some lived experience of mine. It talks about the fact that we, if we can, should pray as if everything depends on God, and then behave as if everything is reliant on us 100%. So kind of feel like it's about trying to come to some kind of understanding. If we feel we can, perhaps get in sync with it, be able to translate any signals that might feel invisible or inaudible, much as we can if we are set to do it. Fine.
Yeah, thanks for that. And by the way, that actually might be Heschel, although I might be wrong. And so part of the idea there is that, prayer and action are intertwined with each other, right? Let's go ahead, Susan, and I have some thoughts as well.
Actually, I think that was Nachman or his grandson of Václav who said that from last week. Following on to the last two comments, there are things that are so horrible in the universe, Israel being one, climate change being another, houselessness and food security and all of those things being others, that I personally can't even find words to speak about them. I mean, I can speak about them sensibly, but I can't offer prayers. It's just too much. And in this last week, with you folks, and this weekend with my own experiences and what I've been reflecting on about prayer, for me, prayer has to be personal. It has to, I don't mean about me, but it has to be from me, and it has to be what's in my world, my immediate world. And I'm not seeking answers because I don't think that answers are going to come. I think I've come to the conclusion that for me, prayer is whatever is in my heart in a different language than I would normally speak. Not that I'm speaking in tongues, but that I would normally speak in conversation. It just comes. And that for me is prayer. And that's what I will accept as prayer for me and define as prayer for me.
Yeah, thank you. Lee, my thought about the question you asked, and I don't claim to be the expert on this, and so I'd be curious, to hear others' thoughts. It reminds me of this story about the town that decided that needed to give a job to Yasala, and the town beggar, and so they made him the watchman of the Messiah. Anybody ever heard this joke before? They stationed him at the gate of the town and they said, "Watch for the Messiah, and if you see him, come tell us." So people walk in and out all the day. Yesala would greet you. He'd say hello. You'd wave at Yesala. How's the work going? And one day somebody came up to Yesala and said, Yesala, how's your job going as watchman of the Messiah? And Yesala said, well, the pay is not very good, but at least it's steady work. So Judaism has always maintained, in fact, fiercely maintained, a belief that the world can and will be better than it is. And in fact, that in the face often of incredible odds and all evidence to the contrary, right? We're talking about medieval Jews who lived under oppression, who were subject to pogroms and discrimination and anti-Semitism, and yet they maintained this notion that the Messiah will come in traditional language, that the Messianic age can come, the world can be better than it is. And it seems to me that prayer has always been, and I'm going to steal Daniel's language again, the spiritual fuel that fuels the Jewish hope that the world can become better. There is an actual story that parallels that joke, which is the story of, I think it's Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, but I could be wrong, who teaches that if you're busy planting a seedling and someone comes to tell you that the Messiah has come, you should finish planting the seedling first and then go greet the Messiah. You might have been tempted to drop the Messiah and go greet the Messiah. He says plant the seedling first and then go greet the Messiah, which is to say, believe that the world can be better, but also believe that it's your responsibility to make it so. Believe that the Messiah will come, but also plant that tree before you go and greet the Messiah. And so I think there is something in Judaism that says to us that we should believe that the world can be better, and that our prayers will help us to maintain this belief that the world can always be better than it is right now. And so, yes, there are a lot of things that are they're outside of our control. The situation in Israel is one of them, except it's not entirely outside of our control, right? We have the ability to reach out to friends and loved ones. We have the ability to speak. We have the ability to make connections and to make bridges and to change minds. It takes a long time, but if we stop believing that we can do that, then the world gets even worse. The only way the world gets better is if we believe that we have the potential to make it better. And I think that, to go back to Rabbi Berezovsky's language, that if prayer has the ability to lift us up and to see possibilities, to lift us to the heights of the world and to see what our possibilities and what our capabilities are, then maybe that's the role that prayer plays in a world where things are often very, very difficult. So we're low on time here. In the minute or so we have left, I'll take you to one last poem by Rabbi Hannah Orden. This is called Svatai Tiftach, Open My Lips. Obviously a riff on the opening words of the Amidah. Adonai Svatai Tiftach, God, open my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. She talks about the ways that our lips are often sealed. She says, my lips are sealed, we say, when we want to keep a secret. What are the secrets we keep even from ourselves? What happens when our lips are sealed with hot wax, stamped with words of doubt, fear, despair, apathy, confusion, loss, and shame? What happens when the wax hardens, crusted, unbreakable? What happens when we forget that our lips once moved freely, opening wide to declare praise and joy and gratitude? What warmth might melt the seal? What power might free the words and songs trapped inside? God, who dwells within us and in our world, melt the hard crust, open our lips, allow us to sing again. Adonai Svatai Tiftach. So I think that those seemingly intractable situations are one of the things that harden the wax around our lips, when we believe that we have no power. And the prayer somehow, when we connect with each other, when we sing songs of hope, when we study together, when we put ourselves into community like this or in our synagogues, then prayer somehow helps to open our lips, which somehow helps to open our hearts, which somehow helps to remind us that we do actually have the capacity to make the world a little better than it is. So I want to thank you for this inspiring discussion. Before we go, I want to mention a class that's starting next week. Since you're already in the habit of studying with me every Monday, next week at this same time, let me just share my screen one more time. I'll be starting a 3-week series related to this, but not exactly the same, which is called Reclaiming Shabbat in Liberal Judaism. Perhaps Shabbat is perhaps one of Judaism's greatest gifts to humanity. In this learning series, we will explore Shabbat from all angles, where it comes from, its various meanings in Jewish tradition, and how to reclaim it meaningfully as 21st century Jews. I contend that we, just like we need prayer, we need Shabbat more than ever before in history, but we liberal Jews have not been very good at claiming it. We leave it to the Orthodox. We say, oh, I drive, I turn on lights, I don't keep Shabbat. I want to talk about how it is that we reclaim Shabbat as liberal Jews. And I'm offering a discount for those who are in this class, for those who are registered for this. So you can go to this, I'm going to put it into the chat. You can go to this link to sign up for the class if you're interested. And it's not very expensive, but even so, it's a 3-week series at this time. If you put in the code TS15, then you'll get 15% discount on that class as well. So I hope to see some of you in that class as well, where we'll talk about how we reclaim Shabbat, just as we've talked about how we reclaim prayer. And again, my thanks to all of you for your presence, for your thoughts, for your, for everything that you contributed to this conversation, and for all the learning that we've done together. Thank you, everyone. Take care. And yes, Holly, I'll send that out in an email. Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your
Thank you.
class.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.